As I stated in my previous video, the internet doesn't create new behaviors. It merely amplifies that which is already present. Now, sometimes it doesn't seem that way, but when you think about it, all these behaviors we can observe go back to some root, some baseline behavior that you could observe easily without the internet in decades prior, or even centuries prior. Now, one of the things that's been extremely negative, that's been exacerbated to an extreme when it comes to online content, is, shall we say, the sin of pride. Now, obviously, I'm no Christian. I don't believe in the metaphysics of Christianity, and there are other things about Christianity that I think are frankly fatuous. However, I do think that Christianity got one or two things right. Now, you've probably heard of the 7 deadly sins. It originally started with 8. A Christian thinker in the late 2nd, early 3rd century called Tertullian came up with them originally, but over the ensuing centuries they were refined. And generally speaking, the interpretation over the centuries is that pride of these 7 deadly sins is the worst one. From the Greek hyperophania to the Latin superbia, and then to the various vulgar languages, including English, we say pride. Now, in the Christian context, pride is really, really bad because it's essentially synonymous with the devil, with Satan, because Satan's chief sin is his pride and his defiance of God. So pride in the Christian context is associated with defiance of God's will, because as a good Christian, you are supposed to be subordinate to God, and so pride is the worst of the sins because you are asserting yourself to be of like stature or even above God in certain respects. Now that bit I think is irrelevant since I don't adhere to the metaphysics of Christianity. But I do think pride, and excessive pride to be very specific, is a huge problem. Pride and its correlate, ego, prevent you from self-correction in many cases. And if you look at the landscape of YouTube, especially when it comes to our favorite topic, guruism, and the many experts out there who are trying to give you life advice, and it's not just them, it's many, many different types of content creators, you'll see that there is a consistent thread with all of them. They all have very big egos, they're all very prideful, and they all always know better than everybody else. Now, part of the reason for this is that the ecosystem of YouTube is, in some sense, inherently harmful in this regard. Which is to say, this is not a platform where you can have normal discussion. Things just naturally become polarized. And the requirement for self-reflection, personal development, and self-correction is conceding when you've been wrong or conceding when there's still much to be learned. But if you make that admission, if you show what's viewed in the eyes of the public, this kind of weakness, in air quotes, then you typically lose support. And so what YouTube and the internet in general does is that it teaches people to dig in their heels even further into hyper-entrenched positions on all manner of things, and to, again, pridefully assert your ego in the face of opposition. Part of it is a tribal team mentality that we've observed many times. That's the obvious aspect. But the other part is the fact that a lot of people on YouTube in particular receive empowerment by the fact that they have a lot of followers. Remember in the previous video I talked about parasocial relationships? Well, it's often the case that the parasocial relationship is not a one-way street, but the people who are the objects of adulation, of reverence, they receive massive boosts to their egos, which subsequently lead them to thinking that they are gods upon earth. I'm being a bit hyperbolic, but there is this two-way street. And so what's happened in the ecosystem of the internet, very specifically YouTube, is that you're rewarded for being excessively prideful, for showing a massive ego, for not backing down, even if you're wrong. And I think it's so extreme that you could probably find people that could argue and would argue that 2 + 2 = 5 and not back down from that position simply because it would damage their brand name, they have a lot of followers, and they're really convinced that what they have to say as content producers is de facto correct because of the feedback loop I've just described. Lots of followers, the embellishment, the enhancement of ego and pride, and so they're really convinced of themselves. But why is this a bad thing? Well, the problem is we human beings, we human apes, are very, very fallible animals. We make mistakes all the time. And when you have a public platform like YouTube and the broader internet, what's rewarded is doubling down on your position, because ultimately this is a fear of loss of status, right? And not recanting and not readjusting what you might have believed or what you've done. And you see this time and again, people making massive mistakes and digging in their heels and saying, I'm still right, or my product is still good despite all the criticism it might be receiving, these sorts of instances. And although I'm not a fan of the word toxic because it's overused in certain circles, as you can imagine, it does create a toxic environment, a very destructive environment. Now, a lot of these gurus, whether they're explicitly in the manosphere or not, they are looked up to by many men, young men specifically. And I'm of the view that if you view yourself as a teacher, as many of these guys do, as wise men leading other men, as they purport to do, then you have to have a flexibility of mind to concede when you're wrong and to course correct sometime. Otherwise, you're just a cult leader. And in fact, Bathrobe Man, aka Hamza, has referred to himself as a cult leader. This is not the type of guidance that young men need. They need experience, they need wisdom, but they also need the flexibility of mind of the individual in question to acknowledge that maybe I was wrong about this, or that the advice that they're doling out isn't some universal panacea to address all the problems that young men are facing. Now, this is obviously wishful thinking, because at the end of the day, most of these guys are simply trying to exploit young men. They're not here to help young men, quite the opposite. So, moving in a direction that would suggest more humility, more course correction, with a genuine attempt to understand young men at the individual level, that's probably not going to happen. And it's bad enough that this problem of ego and pride so infuses the manosphere, or manosphere adjacent areas. It's even worse that this is a universal, basically. Wherever you look online or on YouTube, you will see the sin of pride being committed again and again and again. Content creators become infallible in their own eyes because even when they know they're wrong about something, they will double down. At the end of the day, we're all a bunch of stupid apes, myself included, stuck on a mud rock hurtling about a tiny, tiny, tiny speck of space in the galaxy. I think that fact, coupled with the fact that throughout our lives we make mistake after mistake after mistake, should be enough to warrant some self-reflection, and an attempt to jettison these egos that we've amassed should be enough for some self-reflection and enable us to jettison the pride and egos that we all have to some degree for the sake of the betterment of all. But that is not how the internet works. It's not how YouTube works. And so we're stuck in this situation, which is yet another reason why guruism should be rejected. Whatever you might think they're promising, especially if you're a young man, I guarantee you they will give you essentially nothing. They will bilk you out of your money, they'll rip you off, and they certainly don't care about you. Look, I'm going to be honest, I don't have answers. Not really. None of us really has answers. I'm just trying to understand this mess of existence just like you are. And I'm no better than you. I'm just a dude who is lucky enough to be given a voice that a few people listen to occasionally. That doesn't make me special or better or different. I just lucked out. And if you find the things I have to say helpful or even insightful, then I'm pleased about that. But I would never claim that I'm particularly insightful. Again, I'm just a guy. I'm just a dude. But then again, so is every other content creator out there, even if they're loath to admit it, and even if they would never admit it. As always, thank you for tuning in. Many special thanks to my patrons on Patreon, my donors on PayPal. You guys are the best. You keep the channel alive. Without you, all would be in vain. And if you can leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe, it'd be much appreciated. Until the next time, I'm still alive. May the gods watch over you. Bye-bye for now.
If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.